We promise this will be the best use of your morning today because our today's speaker is Ashwin Mittal. As an executive chairman of C5i, Ashwin Mittal drives strategy, AI innovation, and corporate initiatives. Since founding the company in 2003 and serving as CEO from 2016 to 2024, he has transformed C5i into a global AI and analytics leader. In 2017, he established C5i's AI lab, pioneering the use of generative AI for enterprise solutions. His vision centers on amplifying human potential through the optimal blend of human and machine intelligence. A recognized AI thought leader featured in 100 Most Influential AI Leaders in India of 2024 and AI Makers 100, Ashwin holds an MBA from UCLA Anderson and London Business School and is an alumnus of Harvard Business School's OPM program. He is also a founding member of Mumbai Angels and actively contributes to youth development initiatives through various board positions. Welcome, Ashwin. Thank you so much for taking out time on a Sunday. We know it's exhausting on your end. It's really busy weekend and weekdays for you. So thank you so much. Please join me in welcoming Ashwin, everyone. You can share, welcome him on our chat. Yeah.
No, thank you so much, Nidhi, for the warm introduction, and thank you to you and Nivedan and the Future and AI Group for hosting this. And hello from my end to all the friends who've joined today. Yeah, it's a Sunday, so I hope this will give you some value, like the way Nidhi mentioned. So hope it lives up to expectations, and we'll be very happy to keep it open and discussion oriented. The idea is, well, I'm assuming everybody's heard about agentic AI in some shape or form. And so we do believe, and you all would have seen and read this in many places, but we do believe, and actually now most of the tech leaders believe, that this is going to be the paradigm that is going to drive adoption, large scale adoption of AI in the workplace, and really, make it very much real. Um, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through what it is conceptually, how it works, what's the logic, what it is not, what are the risks, how to deal with those risks, and also share with you some business examples. I believe you'll have another webinar coming up hosted by the Future and AI Group a few weeks later, which is going to talk about architecting agentic systems. So that's not something I'm going to focus on. It's going to not be on the technical side. It's going to be on the business side, conceptual side, and explain how this works and explain how it can benefit companies and businesses. So with that, I'm just going to share some material which I'll use as a backdrop. I may not use all of the material that I have, but it'll help guide the discussion. I asked my team to put together some material, and there's just so much. I had to trim 80% of it, and there's still too much. So we'll cover some of it, and we'll keep it otherwise more discussion oriented. Now, since we have a large group and it's an online forum, what we'll do is I won't pause every time there's a question, but please put your questions in the chat window. And what I'll try to do is, maybe depending on the kind of questions we receive, somewhere halfway through the presentation, I'll try to stop at least once, if needed more, answer any questions, and keep it discussion oriented. And then towards the end again, we'll make sure that we open up for discussion. So, Nidhi, I assume my deck share can be seen, and I'll get started.
Yes, it is
Yeah,
visible.
okay, great. So, so this is just, the broad agenda we're thinking of following. Assuming the first two, three bullet points, a lot of people have heard somewhat, but just to share a point of view quickly on what we are seeing in terms of the AI wave, what's happening in the generative AI hype cycle, What are some of the trends in the Gen AI space? Then we get specifically into agentic AI. What is agentic AI? How it works? What are the kind of frameworks? How you can design these systems? Certain industry use cases. What are the challenges and the need for robust governance? And since this is very topical and usually on everyone's mind, every time I do a webinar on AI, I get asked about AGI. So I thought, depending on interest, I can spend 3, 4 minutes and share some point of view there. Um, so again, very quickly, uh, we saw the first wave of AI, which was perhaps, more in the 1900s, in the early part of the 2000s, which was not intelligent AI. It was done through some kind of programming, right? Like a typical chatbot, it's very rule based. It's done through computer programming. And, it's got, certain logic built into it, and it does so or like OCR, right? That was also a form of AI when it started. But we call it GoFi, good old fashioned AI. Right. The second wave really came with, all the, neural networks and big data sort of revolution, and, machine learning started to become a reality. This really took off around 2015, while we talk about Gen AI today, and it's become more in the public space since the last 2.5 years. These technologies really started to take off around 2014-15 with further development of deep learning, right? Some of you all would have heard of deep learning, but deep learning is a form of machine learning, which got further developed actually in Google Labs, and certain architectures like the transformer architecture that got built, which actually a lot of the today GPT, for example, means generative pre-trained transformer. So a lot of these architectures are based on what was built then. And also some kind of multimodal AI started where, and it's been there since the last 5, 6 years in terms of image recognition, video recognition, text recognition, etc., etc. And then the third wave, which is now in the public space, right? Since the last 2.5 years, since Chat GPT essentially came out, and now everybody talks about it, everybody knows about it, and it's in the entire consumer space and all of that. But there's a lot of things that were happening behind the scenes, and so this is the Gen AI wave. It's not like generative AI started now. Generative AI, we were working on generative AI 5 years back. There's something called energy, natural language generation. It's just that now you've got these very strong foundational technologies which one can leverage, which have been built, these foundational models. And then now is the agentic AI wave, which has been talked about. It's still, I would say, the early stage. And we're going to talk, this is the topic of today, but agentic AI today is somewhat at the stage where the Gen AI wave, which started in where I think some August, September 22, when ChatGPT got released, so somewhere where we were in, Feb, March of 23 with Gen AI, we are somewhere there with agentic AI. The concept is just starting to take off. Releases are happening. Very limited deployments yet, but we are going to see a lot of pace picking up here. And then, the other exciting thing is AI moving into the physical world, right? It's all in the virtual world. Physical world is much more difficult. It is, got multi-dimensional. It is complex. It's messy, but there is a lot of work happening here, uh, and that would be also very exciting, in terms of transforming our lives, for AI moving into the physical world. So continuing there, again, this is a typical hype cycle. This is the Gartner hype cycle. A lot of you all would have seen this. But a point of view, and again, this is, everything, a lot of things here which are, more future oriented are point of views. My point of view is that we are reaching the top of the hype cycle. Typically, what happens with any technology wave, it happened with the internet also, is there's a lot of expectation. It builds up, and we start believing anything can and everything will happen, and it'll happen right away, right? The reality usually is we overestimate the impact of these things in the short term. And I am in this business, right? So I am an evangelist of this. But we typically overestimate in the short term, but then we underestimate in the long term. And this, at least my view is that this is what is starting to happen here. Soon we'll start believing that in the next year, in this year itself and in next year, the whole world is going to change. Everything's going to change. All jobs are going to change, everything. And we'll be disappointed. But a lot will change, but it will take long. The reality is that AI is still prone to a lot of errors. There are hallucinations, inconsistencies, and the technology is moving fast. Maybe these things will get addressed. But the fact of the matter is, it is humans who have to work with it. And organizations have to adopt it into systems. And the humans and organizations are moving somewhat slower. And we take longer to adopt and adapt, right? So we need to really, have business strategy which subsumes Gen AI, not the other way around. Really prioritize high impact and low risk use cases, have deployment. We work with the world's top corporate clients. We work with Fortune 500 clients all over the world, top technology companies, some that are building some of this foundational AI, top CPG companies, top pharma companies. And many of them are in early stages of deployment in their own business, right? It's not like all of a sudden everything has changed. And then, we believe that eventually we will see the plateau of productivity in the next, this may be faster than the internet wave. The internet wave took 15 years, 12, 15 years to really get deployed, in a large scale across the world, across people's lives. We believe here it may be 6, 7 years. You'll see empowered knowledge workers, you'll see large scale implementation and industrialization, and you'll see sufficient safeguards because there are real risks, right? And there are safeguards that we all need to address. I'm not going to go through all this, but there are lots happening. Agentic AI is where we'll focus, but there's multimodal AI in terms of across video and text and images. There are small language models against LLMs, slightly less effective, but much more efficient, faster, consuming less power. We're talking about regional models, countries, and regional languages. Sorry about that, folks. And then we have open source. Open source has just become very exciting now. Assume everybody's read about DeepSeek. And so now everyone has got all this. And honestly, this AI thing has just started, right? If you look back in the early 2000s, maybe some of you all are too young. I don't know what the age of the audience is. I'm a little older. Is at that time the number one search engine was Yahoo, and there was this little unknown startup called Google that we were tempted to use and tinker around with. Today we know what has happened to Google and what has happened to Yahoo, right? So this has just started. We don't know what's going to happen in the next 5, 6, 7 years. Uh, but anyway, so there's lots here, but I'm going to go on. Let's focus on agentic AI, which is the topic of the day. Okay, so what are agentic AI systems? First, to just start out. Okay, so you remember this guy on the right. Most people would be familiar with this guy. This is Agent Smith from The Matrix. Now, very ironically, this term agent was coined by this movie and used in the context of a computer program, right? And now, in the entire space, public space and business world, we are using the same term, right? Which is becoming the term that people are talking about. So it's quite ironic that the term that this movie used is now, but only difference, and I hope this will be different, is this term was used somewhat negatively, right? Because the agent was the villain. But hopefully now the agent will be the hero, and we have to make sure the agent is the hero, right? But what is an agent? So the definition is in bold. Firstly, it's just a computer program. It's just a piece of software, okay? And it is designed to perceive its environment, make decisions, and take actions to achieve a specific goal or set of goals. It's a program written to understand what's happening in an environment. It is put into a certain environment, which could be a business situation, which could be a business process. And then it has to understand what's happening in that environment, and it has to then, basis certain, intelligence that you give it, make decisions and take actions. Okay. It operates autonomously, as in it doesn't need a human operator, and it could work with other agents or other humans in a process. So one way to think about it is, let's say, I'm assuming all of you all have used GPT, Chat GPT, or some other LLM, maybe Gemini or whatever. What do? Right? Today, you will type some question, or if you're using it through API, you will give it some question or some content, and it will give you something back, right? But it can only take and give back. it can't use that to take an action. Now, supposing I want to compose an email to send to somebody, I'll submit it to GPT, GPT will give me the answer back. But now an agent, I'll tell the agent how it will work in an agentic systems. I'll tell the agent that I want to send an email to Nivedan and Nidhi about something, and the agent will access, just like I would, it will access GPT, it will tell GPT to draft an answer. The agent doesn't draft the answer. It'll get the answer from GPT, and depending on what process, and then if you want a process where the agent directly sends it, so I just have to enter the question, the agent will access GPT, get the answer, and send it to Nivedan. So it's not me actually accessing, or it might submit it to me, and then I might approve it, and then the agent will send it. Right. So it's basically a tool that is basically now using the AI systems, whether foundational AI systems like GPT, Gemini, other type of AI systems, or certain AI systems I've built within my organization, predictive models or whatnot, is using those systems and then taking input output from them and then doing something with it. Right. That's essentially the difference. So they are purposeful, goal driven. They can learn and adapt. You can program them to have a learning loop to get better, and they can do reasoning, decisioning, and planning. And we'll talk a little bit about that, right? What does that mean? Not mentioned here, but they can also do reflection, where they can actually evaluate themselves, evaluate their own work, and see how to improve upon it. And all this sounds complex, but I'll simplify this, and you'll see it's actually pretty simple. Uh, so these are the building blocks of agentic AI, right? Goal oriented, as in you give it a goal. It's a software where you typically agents work best in a small constrained space, right? You give it a certain goal, and I'll give you examples and workflows, right? Then it can be adaptive because it's AI. AI is adaptive. It can learn and reason. It can function on its own. You have to decide how much autonomy to give your agentic system. It depends on what process it is, how much risk there is, what is the sensitivity to errors, and you have to decide how much autonomy to give it. It operates in an environment that it interacts, right? So, like the example I just gave, it is now communicating on my behalf with some external people. It could send the email, it could receive the email, it could use GPT to analyze the response and draft another response, right? And then so it can be plugged into workflows. Now, organizations are basically workflows of people, right? And different people are handling different parts of processes within organizations, and it can be plugged into those workflows. And you can have workflows where some parts of the process, instead of humans, you could have agents, and then agents can interact with other agents. So just like humans interact with other humans in a process, let's say in your company you have somebody that provides a requisition, somebody that approves it, then somebody that sends, let's say, a purchase order to somebody. So those are all multi-humans working in a workflow. Same way you can have multi-agents working in a workflow or multi-agents along with humans. Again, I'll explain more and give you some examples. But on the right is a simple pictorial where this is the agent. The agent can access tools just like we can, right? So you don't have to teach the agent. The computer program doesn't have to learn every skill. It can actually access tools which already have the skills. So you don't need to teach it, how to even do calculation or how to understand calendaring or how to interpret a kind of computer software or code or how to access, so it can access a browser to go and get information from the internet. So it has a bunch of tools, sorry, that it can access. And then it can plan. So it can, given a certain question, it can evaluate that question and decide, okay, this is the process I'll follow. You can have it reflect on its own answers. It can generate an answer and you can actually write in the code, okay, now that you've generated an answer, go back to GPT, submit the answer, and ask GPT to evaluate it in light of that question. So it's nothing. Reflection is not the way we humans reflect, but you can actually just ask the program to go and submit the answer it created to the LLM, the same LLM that created or a different LLM, and say, okay, now evaluate this answer against this question and give me feedback whether the answer is good, or redraft the answer. So you're just trying to hedge against any hallucination or errors where the system is evaluating itself and redrafting or correcting. right? Because we know LLMs are not perfect, right? If you ask it a question 5 times, it may give you five slightly different answers. So it can that self-critic, it can reflect and evaluate itself. It can create, it can actually share a chain or a process against a question. This is the way we'll go about it step by step, and create certain sub goals along the way. And then it can take action. And it can have a memory. It can have a short-term memory, which is for performing a certain task and completing that. And you can program it to have some things go into long-term memory. And long-term memory basically goes into create learning and to do something better. Um, so this again, very briefly, just so that we are clear, let's say a very old technology was chatbots. So how are agents different from chatbots? Just to spend some time on that. Chatbots are very scripted, predefined tasks, simple interactions. Agents perform complex tasks. It's not scripted, dynamic decision making. These typically relied chatbots on keywords and pre-programmed responses, while agents are built on using AI techniques like natural language, machine learning, will access LLMs, etc., whatever level you want them to access those. So it will give very customized answers. Of course, that can lead to errors also. While chatbots, if it's a pre-programmed question, it will give you a pre-programmed answer. So it's more controllable. Um, Chatbots are limited adaptability, cannot adapt to situations, are only conversation. Here they adapt and they take action, right? So an example is like a customer service bot, and an agent can actually be a highly trained PA. You can actually, create like instead of hiring an executive assistant, you can actually create a very trained executive assistant for you, which could be an agent, and something I am also thinking of doing, by the way. So let's get into some specific use cases, right? So these are certain use cases, and these typically will be done with multiple agents, not just one. And I'll explain why. But let us say, you have a knowledge management use case, right? Where you want to query your system, your organization's, let's say, data assets to get some knowledge. Maybe you have a bunch of meeting notes, maybe you have a bunch of PowerPoint presentations, maybe you have a bunch of different, emails, etc. And you want to query that to, find out something from your own organizational knowledge base or your own personal knowledge base, right? So you can create, a retrieval agent, a knowledge base agent, a retrieval agent that will go and search it and bring back relevant information. Then you can create another agent that will use something like GPT to contextualize from that and create some kind of response to your question. And you can create a dialogue agent that will answer it back. Right? Marketing uh, is, let's say, you want to generate specific marketing campaigns and send them out. So you could have an agentic system that actually gathers relevant customer data and insights from social media. You could have, so the agent will have access to social media APIs. Then the agent could analyze sentiment, and you can use an LLM. It can use an LLM to do that. Then it can generate a specific marketing campaign. It can generate, use some of the multimodal type of models which are for image generation, like DALI and others, and generate marketing campaigns basis those insights. And then you can actually use an agent to access automated marketing platform and send them out. Now, of course, there are risks in doing this because it's multi-stage of, all being done by agents. So you can then infuse a human at any stage in the process, and you can have agentic system that submits something to a human in the middle, right? Similarly, if you're doing research, you could have a content web scraping agent, and then you could have an agent that synthesizes the relevant response, um, and stores curated content. So this again can be done by accessing an LLM. And then again, it can access an LLM and create a draft of a research paper. In the e-commerce world, you could have an agent that receives requests. Let's say you have a website and then people submit requests. Okay, that I want a refund, I want to buy something, I want to do this, I want to do that. whatever, I'm having some problem. So you can have a triage agent that understands the request. You can have a bunch of other agents. The triage agent will understand the request and then send it to the relevant other agent, and then that agent will could be a refund agent, a sales agent will then handle that action. Right? Uh, so now all these processes are multi-agent. It's up to you how you want to design, whether you want everything to be handled by agents, whether you want everything to be, humans to be interspersed in between, right? At least today, the technology in the early stage, we recommend you have humans interspersed at the right points, right? Couple of things to keep in mind. AI has a certain level of accuracy, right? Uh, and depending on how unstructured the situation that you're putting the AI in, the accuracy can be anywhere from, 75, 80% to 95%. Let's say nowadays it's high, let's assume 95, 98%, right? But now, if you have 10 steps that are all being done by AI, and every step is 95% accuracy, then at the 10th step, you'll have 95% into 95% into 95%, you'll end up with a 60% accuracy situation, right? Mathematically. So you have to decide what level of risk you want to live with. And if you at the fourth or fifth process or third, fourth process, you interject a human and you feel that the human will be able to correct any sort of issues with the anything wrong the agentic system may have done, you can up level your level of accuracy through the process. So, something to think about, right? And you have to decide how sensitive is your use case, to those kind of things. This is just examples. So where different ways to architectures. I won't get too much into this. I think you'll have another webinar coming up. But like some of the examples I gave earlier, you could have a single agent, right? Or the e-commerce example I gave was a supervisor agent along with a bunch of others, right? You could have a hierarchical agent system where, one, and then there's multiple below, and then each one of those below have multiple. And then depending on the situation or use case, you could have a network of agents all collaborating with each other in a workflow. In some cases, things flowing in one direction, things flowing the other direction. Um, you can make agentic systems more powerful by giving them access to tools. You can have three types of tools. You could have knowledge augmentation tools that help the agent get certain information or knowledge which is needed to do a certain process, right? So you could give it access to web browsers, social media APIs, your internal HR systems, your own inventory API of your company, let's say if needed, an email reader, etc., etc. Right. This is one. You can give it, as I mentioned earlier, you can extend its capabilities. You don't need to teach it everything. You can just extend its capabilities by giving it access to tools to again have new additional capability like calculator, calendar, time zone converter, translator, code interpreter, etc., etc. And then you can give it access to tools to take action. Could be an email API, a banking API, or order placement system, or what have you. You have to decide the sensitivity. Maybe a banking API you may not want to give access, right? You don't want to risk just you want a transfer of funds to be done by you, right? Or you could have an API that allows someone to like in my company, my finance team will put up right the transaction, and then someone senior will approve it, and let's say above a certain size, I'll approve it. So you can have a banking API access to just put up a transaction, an author, and then somebody else to approve. So you can decide how you want to do it. Um, so let's talk a little bit about planning, right? So we talk more about how they can be used to do things or to research things. But AI agents can also be used for planning. So you can actually submit a query and the agent can decide, okay, now how to go about dealing with this query and what is the best process to do this. And I'll pause after this for some questions. Let me just get through this. Um, so now an agent, you can submit it a query and it can break it into subtasks. And again, it'll usually access an LLM to do that, a smart LLM, depending on how complex it is. It may go to something like GPT-4, or it may go to something like GPT-O1, which is more complex, more situated for more better for more complex situations. Typically, planning using agents for planning at this stage, we recommend only with simple activities, not very complex activities. Interesting thing is you can actually have an evaluation layer in the planning. So you can have a system where the agent creates a plan, and then you can, just like I mentioned earlier, you can actually resubmit that plan and the question and have it evaluate, have another LLM or the same LLM evaluate that plan and critique it, right? To make it even better, you can actually follow some parts of the plan. Let's say made 5 steps, and at 2 steps you can actually have it evaluate those outputs in light of the process being followed and see if the plan needs to be changed. That can again be done by another agent, or that can be done by you. So there are lots of ways that you can actually use agents to solve for some of the challenges that agentic systems themselves have. You can even ask it to generate alternative plans, and then you can ask another agent to evaluate those alternatives and decide the best, or you can have a human decide which one to be best. Right? And then if you want, you can add certain heuristic rules, right? You can say, okay, any plans that are more than 10 steps I want to eliminate, right? Or any plan that will use too much of my API access and become too expensive in terms of GPT usage or in terms of Gemini usage, I want to eliminate, right? So some of those things you can also do. I have a couple of examples. Let me just do these examples about planning. So, and then I'll pause for questions. Um, so now this is a simple, question. I'll just read this out. So create a Python script that reads data from an CSV file containing customer records, which is name, email, purchase history, process the data to identify top 5 customers based on total purchase amount, and generate a new CSV file with these top customers information. Right? So it's a pretty simple process. You have a planning agent that made this plan. Read the CSV file, process purchase data, identify top 5 customers, write, handle exceptions, find answer. Right? It's a pretty simple process. But now this, we all know that when you're dealing with data, right, company data, and it's not that simple, right? There can be challenges. So uh, look at this, right? So now what you can say is, after processing the purchase data, you can have a replanner agent that can reassess the plan and change the plan if needed, right? Because see here, when we did this, maybe, in some cases, there may be some data that may be messy, some customer data that may be lying in multiple places. So maybe we need to aggregate, because a customer may be called, let's say, my company may be called C5i somewhere else, somewhere it may be called C5i.ai, somewhere may be called by its old name, Course5. So, but then we have a unifying factor, maybe the customer ID. So, or it may be something else, right? So we read the CSV file and then we aggregate it by customer ID, handle inconsistencies, and then we go back. So we do a replanning. Another agent does a replan, and then we get the final answer, right? So you can introduce these architectures to solve for some of the inherent challenges of AI systems. I'm just going to pause here and let me just see, uh, in terms of questions. And I apologize if I can't take all the questions, because I'll just try and see how many I can take. 1 minute. Um, So someone has asked, will agent AI systems replace humans in the future? So these are going to augment workflows, right? Um, and at the end of the day, if you think of most jobs in an organization, it's a bunch of tasks and processes, right? So a lot of the things that we'll end up doing, or our people land up doing, are actually things that not necessarily people need to do, right? All of us in our jobs will do something. I'll go and approve something, someone will place an order, someone will see it, someone will do something else. There's lots of things which AI can solve for, right? And the way that it is going to get solved is probably through agents. So it's not going to replace humans, it's going to replace certain tasks, make it a reality to solve for certain tasks. Um, so someone has asked how to create agents, and similarly, what are good AI tools to build agents? Great question. There's actually a lot of stuff out there. So you can build your own agent using Python and some other languages. So for an AI company like us, we are doing it ourselves. But there are lots of sort of third-party tools out there, and if you're obviously not a company that has like Python programmers or whatever, you can. There are lots of. So if you go to, for example, Agent.ai, it's a website that was launched by HubSpot. HubSpot, the marketing campaign platform. On Agent.ai, they've created an agent marketplace. Right? They've put up their own agents, and anybody I think can publish an agent out there. So you can get like the examples that I shared, like a web search agent or a sentiment analysis agent, or all you can get these agents from there, right? And they may not be perfect. Some may work for your needs, some may not work. If you are a larger organization, if you can afford it, and you have something very specific, you can get some kind of small AI consulting company to help you to build it, right? So someone has asked a very good question. Um, what are the best practices and tools to build and deploy such agents? Companies often worry about data security, how to take care of that part. Uh, I believe the fundamentals remain constant. So not worried about the latest tool, but the architecture. Actually, that's spot on. I mean, that comment is very sharp and very much the case. And if you all see, I did allude to some of that. But the risks are not just around accuracy, but there are risks around data privacy, data security, how your agents access data, then what they leak out. Supposing like you're handling this customer data, right? Now, if that same the agent is handling the customer data, if you could give it access, it's a sensitive situation where that customer data should not be leaked, and the agent in certain output actually mentions the name of the customer. Well, it's not supposed to do that. It's supposed to aggregate only by ID. So then you have to be careful, right? What you give it access to, and then you have to be careful how you program it. And then after that, you should audit it, right? Any AI system should be tested. And then even when it is deployed, it should be deployed first in a pilot mode. And even later on, when it is deployed in industrial mode, it should be regularly audited, right? Because the reality is that business rules also change. Our underlying data also changes and transforms. Our business changes. So, and as the agent is learning, sometimes its learning could get influenced by some of these changes and go in the wrong direction, right? Depending on our program. So it may drift from its objectives, right? Uh, so someone has said, how are agents different than legacy systems? So the main difference is that they can access AI tools, right? When you access these AI tools, then you can use the power of AI in your work without actually having to use the tools themselves, right? I hope that's clear. And then you can build into that certain self-learning capability. Someone has asked, where can I find agentic AI? So I think I gave that example, and there'll be plenty of other examples. Do we need any knowledge of coding, testing, fixing for agentic AI? So again, if you're building your own agents, yes. But actually, today, well, I should correct myself. You can either build your own agents in something like Python, but there are tools to get agents, but there are also tools being deployed to build agents, right? There are lots out there. If you just go and search, you'll find agents for HR, agents for marketing. You'll find toolkits to build your own agents in a very simple way. So you actually don't need to be technical. And every week, every month, it is getting easier and more available, right? So today, I would say if you're not a tech savvy company and let's say a smaller size business, that obviously doesn't have just unlimited budget, then I'd suggest starting with the simple use cases and using, those simple agents, but do work on it, start adapting it. And in the next 1, 2, 3 months anyway, we'll see a lot more availability. Uh, I think, and Ashutosh has made a great point. Making agents is going to be as simple as making a social media reel one day. Actually, and Ashutosh, it's not that one day is, in my view, maybe like in the next 3 months, before June, is probably, yeah, for most use cases. And I'm glad you agree. So great, guys. I'm just going to continue. Great questions, and I'll pause once more after. Of course, then I'll get done, and then we can chat. Um, so this is just some, just additional thinking on decision making, right? Now, you when you use and when you use agents to make decisions, and where you should bring in humans and where you should use AI, right? The best combination is actually a combination of human and AI, because the AI has certain skills a human doesn't have, the human has certain skills the AI doesn't have. So if you're making an important decision, right, using a combination of both will usually give you the best outcome. It's a human and AI combination, which is really most powerful. And it depends to what extent you use the LLM, to what extent you use the human, right? Is this something where you need to hold somebody accountable? It's a use case. Then you can't hold, I mean, what will you do using a LLM accountable, right? How difficult and complex is the task? What is the significance of a personal thought process, right? Some things you want that person's personal attributes coming in, right? If it is something to do with, some manager and their team, right? That manager may have a certain style managing their team. So the way, that manager manages their team should reflect in, whatever communication instruction. So you shouldn't be using too much of agentic there to, in a situation that needs certain emotion or empathy. And again, is this something irreversible, right? Is it an irreversible process or something reversible if it is subject to errors? So humans could be, where we want our own decision making style to come in. We want our emotions and mood to get reflected in our work, or we don't want it to get reflected, then use less of human. We want mental models. We all have certain things we've learned because a certain thing, certain business situation is there, which we may not have a formula we can write down, but there is a formula in our heads because we've been doing it for so many years as what is best in a certain situation. We want that reflected. Um, and LLMs is, where, we have, large data, we are able to do good prompt engineering, and where a situation where we can have explainability, but we have to keep in mind the challenges, limitations, and risks. So this, I want to give you a very specific process example just to make it a little simpler. This is actually a full process. And this is something which, you guys can actually start using very soon. So let's say, I assume a lot of you all are tech companies. I don't know what your companies are, but I think I'd heard a lot of you all could be tech startups and tech companies. So, one bane is just recruiting, right? In tech businesses, or actually in any business, is recruiting and hiring people. And it's a process of going and finding good people, interviewing them, processing those resumes. And then you have typically an HR team, you have, your different business teams, and, so much work goes into it. And so I'll just give you an example how to imagine a recruiting workflow, right, using Agentic AI. So let's say in a company like mine, usually a team leader, some not very senior person, but slightly senior person who's running a certain process and then needs more resources, so raises a requisition, right? So now how would we do this with the agent and human workflow? An AI agent receives that requisition and bases that requisition, creates a JD, and along with that JD also checks our enterprise resource management system to see, one, is that skill available elsewhere in the organization? And also to check what is the actual usage of resources, whether capacity utilization or whatever else, to provide a report is how much do we actually need this skill, and is the skill available elsewhere in the company that this team leader was not aware of. And it just creates a report and provides it to a senior manager who sits on top of that team leader. The senior manager sees that report and says yes or no. may say yes, go ahead and hire a new person, may say no, do nothing, or may say, okay, go and check some internal resource, right? Supposing the person says yes, it comes back to the agent. Agent then crafts this JD. Well, it's already crafted the JD. It may sharpen the JD, and then it has access to, let's say, Monster and Naukri and whatever else. And it has access to my HR databases, which has a set of candidates that we've talked to in the past. It will post that JD on Naukri and Monster and check the database. It will merely inform HR. So HR, your HR team size is somewhat reduced because you don't need to actually have HR do this unnecessary work, right? Or we shouldn't say reduce, maybe HR teams become more efficient because they can do other things in terms of keeping your people engaged. Then the agent will receive the resumes from these portals, may search the portals, may receive JD from the applications and from internal database, and then it will use its intelligence to map these resumes against my JD and identify, let's say you can give it a rule, identify top 20, 30 resumes or top 15 resumes, whatever. And those also you can ask it to, let's say, put into three sets: priority one, priority two, priority three. Okay. Then it will send these to HR. Then HR will review these. And then here you could have HR actually update the prioritization, right? So let's say I've put five as priority one, five as priority two, five as priority three. My HR team might say, okay, no, I'm retagging some of these. So then firstly, that creates a self-learning loop that will go back to the agent who did the prioritization. So in the and resume identification in the future, it gets sharper. This is what HR is doing, right? Then the HR will provide an interview panel. So these are, let's say, the three people in the company who should interview for all these roles. The agent will then access the calendar of the organization of those three people, and it will reach out to those candidates, tell them, please, we would want you to join C5i, let's say my company, and we would like to schedule an interview for you, and then it will coordinate between the calendar software and the candidate and schedule the interviews. Again, no need for a person to do that. Then it will provide the feedback post interviews. It will summarize, which will be provided by people. Each person who did the interview will provide the feedback. The agent will then summarize all the feedback and share the recommendations with HR, right? Then again, HR, on receiving those recommendations, might critique it, might change it basis the feedback, because it has received the feedback and the recommendations. That will again create a learning loop going back into the process. Then the HR will make a decision on offer, and it will call for a team meeting if needed for any discussion. The HR will check the references. The agent carries out your employee verification and creates an offer and sends an email. Then HR may do the final negotiation, and then the agent may generate and send final offer letter. Right. So this is an example of how we've changed a typical recruiting process to include Agentic AI. Now you have every organization will have an HR IMS, but an HR IMS will do some of these things, but not do them intelligently. Right. So now all of a sudden you can do these. Now this is just a suggestion. Now theoretically, this whole thing can be done by agents, right? The reference checking can be done by agent. The interview panel decision can be made by the agent. Everything, a lot of things here can be done by an agent. Or maybe some things here should not be done by agents. Maybe you can remove some of the green and make them dark, right? It's up to you. And you can experiment, right? Just an example of an imagined workflow. Um, let's see, I will, try to take it a little faster from here. Uh, so this is about, using agentic AI and decision making, what all you can use agents for. You can use it for gathering intelligence. You can use it for defining the problem. And you can use it for gathering the relevant information from various sources. You can use agents to design, so structure the problem. Okay, what are the key components, the relationships, the dependencies, define the evaluation criteria, identify alternatives. and then you can use to evaluate options of answers. Um, so this is an interesting example of marketing content optimization. This is actually something we did, our company, for a pharma company, right? And in the US, of course, pharma can advertise. So this is for a US big pharma client, but pharma is very sensitive, right? So we received marketing content. We have a business analyst that analyzed that content, the keywords, the key topics, the patterns, the images, positioning. We had a data analyst agent that extracted this text and all and understood it. Then we had a scoring agent that scored this content, how good is it, depending on the use case. Then we had a recommendation on the content agent that actually recommended how to improve this. And then we had a content generation agent that regenerated the content. And then they went back to the final recommended content, and that went to an internal reviewer that included MLR, medical, legal, and regulatory review. And then they gave an approval. Either they approved it or they gave feedback, and then the feedback, if it needs to be run again by this whole, so there's a feedback loop, went back to the business analyst, and the whole thing was processed again. So it depends. And then it was sent as not have, which can also go back to feedback. So again, another example for multi-agent workflow. A lot of people asked about using agents. So this is, as you can see, there's lots out here. I don't know if you can, how well you can see this. On the left is agent.ai. On the right is a bunch of other places, right? So there's a bunch of open source, closed source agents. But everything we've talked about today, you'll find some, agents out there to do it. I'll just go to this slide. We'll talk about governance here, right? So I think a lot of this we covered, but you really need to think of co-pilot versus autopilot, right? To what extent do you want the human and agents to work together? At what stages you want human to review? How sensitive is your use case, right? Versus, and then autopilot is where something just runs on its own, right? Um, As you mentioned, multiple steps with errors at each level can lead to a vastly incorrect output. Um, you should evaluate where you should have human in the loop. So not mentioned on this slide, actually in the earlier slide, but there you have to also keep in mind data sensitivity, data privacy, data security. What is the nature of the data? What is the sensitivity there? And what is the risk of the agent uh, using that data incorrectly? Agent systems can be opaque also, right? The thing with AI is you don't really know how AI functions. You program it, but after a point, then it just learns on its own and it adjusts its own formulas and its own parameters, right? The other thing is social adaptability. Sometimes you may ask an agent to create, let's say, like the medical case I gave, to create a campaign or create content. You will use it to optimize the business performance of that content, right? Where do I get the best response for that campaign? But the agent may only focus on that, but there may be something that may not be socially acceptable, right? It may create something which maybe if it's shown to 1,000 people, if your normal campaign gets 10 people to click, maybe it will get 20 people to click. And that for the agent is a success. That's the goal you gave it. But in that process, it created something that offended 500 people out of your 1,000 people, right? So that obviously you don't want. So those kind of things humans typically take care of, right? We intuitively take care of things like that, but the agent may not unless you give it rules or you intersperse a human. So you have to think about those kind of situations and things also, right? Let me see if there's anything in this which I want to just cover from here. I think we talked about audit. I just want to mention again, you should keep auditing agent systems. and where, let's say, there are some unforeseen situations that agent might have to deal with because you're giving it an open autonomy. Set a default behavior. Okay, if you don't know, then do this, or if you don't know, then if your, let's say, your own accuracy score is less than this, then please bubble it up to a human to to intervene. So things like that. And the last is you should use agents while I'm saying all the bad things and evaluate the cost savings or the efficiency that you will get or the better performance you'll get versus need for accuracy and versus risk. And also, agentic systems also cost money because they access your APIs, right? You pay for certain tokens in GPT or Gemini or whatever else you're using. And you also have a cost of API access. So evaluate that also in terms of whatever you get in terms of faster process or cost savings or efficiency. Um, since AGI is the hot thing that everybody talks about, I couldn't resist sharing a point of view. And actually, this is not, I'm not even sharing a point of view. I'm just going to share other people's point of view. Um, it's better not to provide your own point of view. So what is AGI? Artificial General Intelligence. Honestly, nobody knows. Sam Altman says AGI is, AI being the equivalent of a median human that you could hire as a coworker, right? And there are a bunch of other definitions here. Look at Elon Musk. He says AI that is smarter than the smartest human. Now, there are two experts, global leaders. One says it is a median human we could hire as a co-worker, and Elon Musk says smarter than the smartest human. So nobody really agrees. There's a big difference right there. Median human versus the smartest human. Uh, and then, other people have a bunch of other definitions. I actually really like, very, very specific definition that I found that I like is, I was reading this book, The Coming Wave, Mustafa Suleyman. Mustafa Suleyman was the founder of DeepMind, and now he's the head of Microsoft AI. So he says that we'll achieve AGI if we can tell an AI system, uh, I have $100,000 to invest. You have access to retail web platforms like Amazon, etc. Go and figure out how to make $1 million with a $100,000 investment. Like, this is a tough thing for an entrepreneur to do. A really smart person would figure out, okay, what's available, what's being bought, what is the gap, what can I go and source on Alibaba or somewhere else, and what can I use to assemble it somewhere else, and then what can I use to sell it here and make the profit, right? So that would be really unstructured. This is really tough for you. So this would be then something, a really smart AI that could think through all of this, understand the trends in the market, read social media. So it would require real intelligence to do this, right? So I like this definition, but anyone can like any definition they want. And will all this lead to AGI? Again, nobody knows. The head of this is Jan is the head of Meta's AI program. He says that the path towards AGI, LLM is an off ramp. It is a distraction and a dead end. It will not lead to AGI, right? Because of some challenges with the way LLMs learn, the way they need a lot of data. Actually, those challenges are mentioned below. This is a while back. Demis Hassabis said deep learning, right, which I told you came out in 15, 16, is not going to solve for AI. And now Sam Altman very recently says that we will have super intelligence in a few thousand days. And he's obviously betting on his own body of work and all this work they're doing with LLMs and then, et cetera, et cetera, right? Few thousand days means what? Like 1,000 days is 3 years. Few thousand days maybe meaning 6 years. I don't know. We'll see. He says few thousand days, so it's hedged, right? So he's also hedging. It could mean 10,000 days also. Um, but yeah, what are the general views? Again, this is not my view. I don't want to be the predictor here. LLM advances will continue this year and next year. We'll have a lot more explosion of multimodal AI, a lot more capabilities of image, text, video. We'll really generate, very, very lifelike videos. We'll start making movies using AI, etc., etc. Um, I do believe AI agents is going to we are going to see a lot more in this year and the next 1, 2 years to really deploy into the mainstream. and people are saying it'll come more into the physical world. AGI emergence, 2030 to 2040. And what is which AGI? No one really knows. No idea. But again, it's out there. So that's all. Thank you so much. I'm going to unshare now. But I hope you all enjoyed that. I hope it was helpful in some way. Uh, so I'll just open the chat window. If anyone wants to also, of course, unmute and ask. Uh,
Hi, Ashwin. Nivedan here. Yes.
hi, Nivedan. You want
So,
to take it over from here?
yeah. So, no, I think before you take on the questions, which you should definitely, some people are waiting for their questions. I think one thing that I was looking forward to and will be helpful to everyone in the room would be to, you've highlighted all the places where you think humans are probably have to be considered. So, the co-pilot versus autopilot question, and how do you design workflows and experiment around it? I think if you could probably think of or suggest some frameworks, or maybe how would you decide in what situation do I pick a human versus I bet on an AI? If we can have a simpler decision making around that. I get that from the HR example, we had some of those. So, because one of them was around complexity, one of them was around accountability, right? And so on. So, given today's, and I'm talking about not future prediction, but today's capabilities of LLMs, which are going to be like the CPU in some ways of orchestrating the agentic workflows, where do you see the immediate pitfalls from your experience that, hey, we have tried these 7 things, it is disappointing that these 2 or 3 things we thought it would work, it didn't work, and this is our learning. I'm looking, because you've done so much of hands-on things on this, what are your insights on that, more from examples, sir?
Sure, sure. So, well, I mean, there are lots of frameworks out there. Um, but there's a very simple, and every company's process is different. All of you all are, could be in very different businesses. The simple framework you should make for yourself is risk versus reward, right? I think those are, there's data privacy and all kind of things. Everything comes within those two things, right?
Mm,
Is
mm,
what is the reward you're going to get in terms of, are you actually going to get something better, firstly? And how much better is it going to be,
yeah.
right? In terms of automating people's time, in terms of a better output, in terms of more accuracy, in terms of faster service, etc. And what are the risks, right? The risks are accuracy, relevance, data privacy and security, right? And social, and even IP infringement. You could infringe on somebody else's IP that you
Right.
didn't want to, or your IP could get infringed. They say LLMs don't learn, but nobody knows, do the LLMs actually learn from your data or not? So you should make a simple matrix of risk versus reward. Put all the different rewards there, put all the different risks there, and pick the use cases that have the lowest risk. If you're starting out now, you're not behind, because honestly, people have been deploying and it's work happening. But I mean, you're not behind. You can start now. Pick the use cases. Take 10 use cases and map them on that simple framework, and pick the ones with the highest reward and lowest risk, right? Go very, very sensitive. I would say medium reward is also okay, but go with lowest risk to start with, right? Absolute lowest risk. And if you're picking something at a high level of risk, then bring in more human interface, right? Because if in your organization, whether it is with your internal people or external stakeholders, whichever stakeholders, if you start messing up, right, then you'll just go far behind. You'll just completely lose momentum. Whether you're just, whoever you might be within your organization, whether you're the CEO or whether you're the person running a process, or you're in charge of your AI program, right? You'll just lose momentum. So pick those and then take it step by step. Don't try and re-architect your organization and go something at scale. Yeah, I mean, if you're, of course, an AI whiz, an AI entrepreneur, and you're starting off with a very different objective, you want to change the world, that's different. But if you're a normal business
Yeah.
person, then just evaluate on those two axes.
So that helps. That helps. Thanks a lot. I think I probably, since your time is most spent working with large enterprises, you have to be hyper conscious of the risk element more than the reward. It seems you have to play a little bit on the back foot when it comes to this decision making. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, well, I guess that's fair, Nivedan. So we are more sensitive, yeah, on
Yeah.
the risk side. It's true. But in general, and this sounds counterintuitive that as a practitioner, as an evangelist of using these technologies in
Yeah.
space, I'm asking you to err more on the side of risk. But I mean, that's just my view is that especially if you're starting out, right? It doesn't matter even if you're a smaller enterprise. I think just be more sensitive on, again, unless you're an AI first entrepreneur and looking to change the world and you have something breakthrough that you're doing and you're well aware of the risks and you're willing to gamble and you're doing whatever you're doing with full knowledge, that's fine.
Yeah.
Uh, but if you're not, then I would suggest, yeah, yes, it's true. I'm kind of biased because we deal with large organizations that are more sensitive, but I would recommend being slightly more conservative.
Got it. Thanks. That answers it beautifully. I think you can take up the questions and maybe, if maybe because we are towards the end of it anyway, would you? Yeah, I think we have a bunch of questions. You can take them from there. Yes.
Uh, what steps can be taken to minimize biases in agentic AI systems in critical sectors like law enforcement, healthcare, and finance? What bias decisions can have serious consequences? Great question. What kind of legal and regulatory frameworks are needed to ensure the safe and responsible deployment of agentic AI across industries? So actually, great question, especially the first one. I'm not, an expert on legal. There's a lot happening. There's the AI Act that the EU has come out with on what, depending on what type of system you're developing, what impact it has, what risks it have, what kind of audit you need, whether you're allowed to develop it or not. Um, but what steps can be taken to minimize biases in agentic AI systems? So, this is also sensitive, right? Because at the end of the day, the system learns from whatever data it's received, right? Whatever, let's say LLMs. So LLMs, for example, we know, right, has been tested, is there is inherent bias in public data, is you generate an image of, let's say, criminal, it may generate, of certain races, right? Certain racial bias, right? Or generate of a doctor, it may be more attuned to a male rather than a woman, right? And those are all human biases that we also all have, right? These are not just, I mean, it's not that the agent is a rogue. It's just learned from what is the data in the public space and what biases, we have. It's not anybody's fault. It's just biases that are inbuilt by our, what we're exposed to and all that. But when we have biases, our bias is restricted to what work we are doing, right? Is Ashwin's bias is restricted to only what he does, and I'm trying hard to overcome my biases, but I'm sure I have some, right? But when AI has a bias, it scales, right? It scales. So like these agents, right? One agent can be doing the work of 1,000 people. And then let's say if it has learned from a bias that Ashwin had, then it scales and then that is now being done 1,000 cases, right? So that's bad. Um, and so you need to so firstly there are some tools out there. Microsoft has something in Azure, a safety sort of, I forget what it's called, but they have a system where you can flip on safety. It's very interesting. And when you're accessing OpenAI GPT, let's say through Azure, you can flip on safety and you can check it for bias. You can check it for, let's say, something else and something else. So, you make sure that you don't generate content which is socially inappropriate. You can make sure that you don't, that certain biases get addressed and filtered out. But at the end of the day, it's AI upon AI, right? So it's not perfect. So wherever these kind of situations, at least today, I would recommend having some kind of human in the loop. Um, Again, sorry, this is the most recent book I read, so I like it. He talked about legal and regulatory frameworks. Read The Coming Wave, Mustafa Suleiman. He's actually even more cautious. He's a practitioner himself. I think he's painted a little bit more heavily on the risk side than one needs to. But he's concerned about the future risks, and he's mapped out actually at a industry level and at a global level and government level, what are the things we need to do to ensure safety of adoption of AI? It's not that he doesn't want us to, he is himself building it, right? And he's built it in the past. He's responsible for some of it. He was the first one with DeepMind, but he wants to make sure that it is safely adopted and adapted. So again, Mustafa's book I found very interesting and helpful. So you could read that if you like. Or maybe you can get AI to make you a summary if you're not into reading a full book. uh, so I think there's one last question, one or two last question. One last question. Will it be possible? Some questions are key pitfalls. I think I'd mentioned the pitfalls. Hopefully that got addressed. Um, uh, and what are the use cases for Gen AI-based agentic systems? The most and where ML-based systems would fare better. So agentic systems are not different from ML systems. Agents are different. So ML is a program that basically is an algorithm, right? That is smartly doing something, receiving input and creating output, right? An agent actually accesses ML systems. So, for example, let's say for a company, I want to explain this here. Let's say a company is ordering inventory, right, managing its inventory, and let's say my organization has created an ML system for the company that looks at how much their production process is consuming, what is the future production plan, what are the orders in hand, how much inventory stock is there, how much time it takes to get inventory from different suppliers. We want to optimize carrying costs, but we don't want to lose production hours, etc. And then predicts, okay, when you should order and how much you should order, right? So that's what an ML system is doing. So the agent is actually accessing that ML system and then using it to then go ahead and place those orders. So I think that's the difference between the two, right? As the ML system is taking an input and giving an output, the agent could be using that ML system, could be using other sources of data or knowledge, and then triggering certain actions. So I hope that was clear, but that is what I just wanted to explain as the fine difference. Um, and there's another question: how would the UX be transformed in your view, especially with conversational interfaces picking up? But these are only text-based, but humans more visual in nature. Yeah, absolutely. So but this is a good question. So that's what agents come in, right? Agents can access not just conversational LLMs, but they can access image generating LLMs also, like DALI and others. So, depending on your use case and depending on the nature of how you want to engage with internal or external stakeholders, you could use agents to make it more imagery oriented also. But that's great. Thank you so much. I think we run through all the questions. Nivedan, anything else? Do you think we should close then for the day?
I think thank you so much, Ashwin. I really appreciate this. I was extremely attentive and I observed every single thing that you said. Thank you so much. I think this is, I don't know if people realize, but this is exceptional that we get an opportunity to understand agentic AI and I could notice every single slide had its own frameworks and definitions. You were extremely fundamental and conceptual with this. Which is essential. You had enough examples. I think it means I have a learning style where I learn from frameworks and these definitions, going absolutely on the ground before we start to build on it. So that is, I personally had a wonderful time. I think this is, I was like extremely attentive. I hope everyone else found this observation valid and they had a great agentic introduction. And it was more than an introduction, honestly. I don't think this was an introduction. This was much more. So for all the people who are here, you can share in your comments and anything else that you want to discuss around agents. You can probably reach out to me or Ashwin later. Happy to have that chat as well. So yeah, that would be it. Nidhi, is there any you would like to take up, and then we can conclude?